Premier denying today it was an overreaction to shut down the economy for so few cases. What are the medical experts saying?
Look, I think the consensus among most of the experts is really no one really knows what would have happened if this lockdown had not have been called. The Premier is certainly saying it worked, and the fact that we haven't had a spread in Melbourne of cases proves that it did work. I think it's been a real test for their contact tracing systems, and they seem to have come through with flying colours. They are saying that they've traced about 66 cases, 66 close and secondary contacts per case, and put a ring, if you like, a ring of steel around those contacts, what they're calling the third ring. It was interesting to hear the comments of the Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, in Victoria today, that he does think that third ring will be enough in future to control any outbreaks, including of the UK strain. And that seems to really fly in the face of some of the quite over-the-top sorts of comments that we're hearing from politicians in Victoria, that this is a hyper-infective strain moving at hyper speed, transmitting faster than contact tracers can keep up. I think that has proven not to be the case. So whether or not these kind of rolling lockdowns will need to be called in Victoria as time goes on, and the possibility arises of more cases emerging is really an open question, and one that I think they'll be examining very carefully now.
Yesterday, we saw the TGA approve the AstraZeneca vaccine for all Australians over the age of 18. In the lead-up to that happening, there had been some question marks about whether it would be approved for the oldest band of Australians. The regulator, though, was pretty strong on this, though, yesterday, saying despite those concerns we've seen raised overseas about the efficacy of the vaccine on older Australians, they were saying essentially, on balance, looking at real-world evidence, they didn't see any need to implement that upper age cap.
Yeah, look, it was interesting to see the regulator put out what effectively was a little bit of a proviso on the stats around the efficacy of the vaccine in the elderly. If you look closely at the public assessment report that the TGA made public when it approved the AstraZeneca vaccine, you can see that their own clinical evaluator did raise what he described as, I don't know if it was a he or she, I'm sorry, but he or she, the clinical evaluator, described as significant concerns around the robustness of the data of the vaccine's efficacy in high-risk groups, and actually that evaluator actually recommended that there be that kind of a disclaimer, if you like, put out by the TGA, saying that they don't actually have the data around its efficacy in the elderly in particular. They are saying, though, we did hear very clearly from Professor John Skerritt, who heads up the TGA, yesterday, that based on the immunogenicity data, and that is really what they can see from blood tests from the clinical trials about what kind of an immune response people were having to the vaccine, they're feeling very confident that based on that immunogenicity data, it will have a highly effective response in the elderly to the vaccine. And they're feeling buoyed certainly by some of that real world data coming out of the UK. So I think it was a challenge for them. They need to be really clear about what evidence they do have and some of the limitations of this data. But as far as the TGA goes, all the indications are that there won't be a problem with efficacy in the elderly.
For most of us, the dosage schedule is going to see 12 weeks between when we get the first jab and when we get the second one. What does that mean for the rollout, if anything, and the government's pledge to have everyone who wants to be vaccinated by October?
Yeah, well, we saw a qualification put on that yesterday by the Health Minister, Greg Hunt. He has made it clear now that October timeline, in terms of what he was saying previously would be when we would have vaccinations complete. Now that timeline really relates just to when everybody had their first vaccination. So given that you're going to have 12 weeks between doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, which most of the population will be getting, it's clearly not realistic or achievable to have had both doses by October. Yeah, that time frame has shifted somewhat so that now it's just everybody has their first dose by October. And I think that's fair and reasonable. And that's certainly an ambitious time frame. And there's going to have to be plans put in place. You know, we're going to see things like, you know, showgrounds, stadiums taken over as mass vaccination sites. We're certainly going to have to get a wriggle on to vaccinate as many people as possible if we're going to meet that ambitious time frame.
Yep, well, they're getting on with it with the Pfizer vaccine starting to roll out next week in New South Wales and Queensland. Natasha Robinson, appreciate you joining us. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ash.